Welcome back to the 8 City Velo podcast. Todd Zolecki, Philadelphia Phillies beat writer and author of The Life of Roy Halladay, has joined me here today in a very special episode. Mr. Zolecki, thank you for coming on to the show, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm doing well, and once again, thank you for coming on. It was a real pleasure to read your book. Really insightful to see Roy Halladay's life, and it was very sad, of course, to see his career come to an end, but to just know all the information that you provided was truly a great piece of journalism.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've been getting, it was a real challenge to write a story about Roy, and you wanted to make sure you did his story justice. But I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of other baseball fans enjoyed it as well. He was a big baseball player during the 2000s, and you even provided in your book that he was one of the best players during that generation. Accumulated one of the highest WARs during a 10-year span. And just diving right into the questions for today, my first question about your book is at the beginning. And Halladay becomes the second pitcher ever to throw a no-hitter in the postseason. Why did you start the book at that moment?
I just thought that was kind of the pinnacle of his career. It had been everything that he had worked toward his entire life. A, to being a big league pitcher, and then B, to being a pitcher that could pitch well in the postseason. And, like I said, it was the I personally believe it was the highlight of his professional baseball career. And I thought rather than, start with Roy Halladay was born in 1977, kind of lead off with that, and then kind of use that as a jumping off point to get in, how his entire life was kind of built for that moment.
It seems like kind of a style that some authors like to use. They like to start the high point and then start from the beginning. It seemed to really work in this case because, especially with the get-go of how Roy Halladay was doing his bike training and his whole training regimen still during a playoff start, it almost seemed to foreshadow the type of player that he was and the type of work ethic that he had into his baseball career.
Yeah, he was one of the, you talk to any of his teammates, and he was one of the hardest working guys ever. And, he said, he went into that start with more confidence, he said, than he had in any other start, because he had about 9 days to prepare for it. And he just knew that the way he was wired, that nobody would be able to out-prepare him. So no matter how much film the Cincinnati Reds might have studied on him, how to beat him, that he was going to study more and work harder. And again, everything from the physical aspect to the mental aspect, all of that training really kind of helped him, I guess, get into that moment and then dominate like he did.
It's especially impressive because Halladay throughout his career has always been a fearless competitor and a team player, but he had a pretty incredible start as well, because even though he was a first ballot Hall of Famer, he did not settle into the big leagues until several years after his debut. So after speaking with Halladay and those close to him, why did it take him so long to find himself in the majors?
I think because, well, first of all, the physical part, he wasn't just pitching well, he wasn't throwing strikes. I talked about earlier how he had a different delivery coming up through the minor league system and how that got changed. And this guy by the name of Mel Queen basically totally broke him down physically and then rebuilt his entire pitching mechanics. And that was one thing. But I think the biggest thing, and Roy said it throughout his life, is, mentally he wasn't equipped to handle the pressures on the mound, off the mound, at the ballpark, away from the ballpark. And then once he met Harvey Dorfman, the famous sports psychologist, he started to kind of get a grasp of what he needed to do mentally to be successful. And you talk to any athlete, that they always talk about confidence and this and that, but it's very true. And Roy, once he started working with Harvey and kind of buying into what he was saying, that it kind of helped him take off. It kind of helped him put everything in perspective and figure out what was important to him and what was needed for him to be successful. And he followed through it. Everything that Harvey told him, he basically did, and it obviously paid off.
Halladay, of course, started or was demoted rather back to single A ball, and it seems like not a lot of pitchers could, or players for that matter, could take themselves from single A ball and go all the way back to the major leagues and then to become a first ballot Hall of Famer. And it's pretty amazing to even have a type of player who would just follow this book so profusely, even though so many players have helped him. It really seems like Halladay was just the right type of person to completely follow all of Dorfman's teachings.
Yeah, I think he was at the lowest point of his career, and he at least I think to his credit he kind of recognized that he needed some help, and in Harvey he picked up Harvey's book, The Mental ABCs of Pitching, and he said later on after his playing career he felt like somebody was kind of following him around and writing about his innermost thoughts, and so you kind of knew that there was some sort of connection there, was something real there, and they met in 2002 and basically after that they talked before every start, after every start, during the season, during the off season, and I think that commitment that he showed to the mental side of the game was just priceless for him.
Do you think one of the reasons why he struggled understanding with the mental side of baseball is because he didn't really encounter that much adversity before? He was always one of the best pitchers in his town. He at first started to really come up through the ranks of the minors, but when he got demoted to single A, it seemed like that hit him like a truck. And do you think that's when he started to just look for anything to help him, including reading Dorfman's books and really take the advice of other pitching coaches?
Yeah, I think so. I think his wife Brandy said, he grew up growing up. He was a big fish in a little pond, and then he was kind of a big fish in a bigger pond, and then he was just kind of like, he was just lost out there. He was just a fish, a small fish, and so yeah, I think the fact that he had not really experienced those types of struggles before, and I think the fact that they kind of started to snowball on him, and he continued to feel more and more pressure to kind of live up to everybody's expectations, from family expectations to organizational expectations to outside expectations. I think wore on him, and then Harvey kind of gave him the tools to go beyond that.
And one of those people in Halladay's life that really put expectations on him, it seems like it was his dad, Roy Halladay II. And his dad really seemed to teach him, or really just provided Halladay of how he thought and what his personality was like. He was always tinkering with different hobbies. He was always doing research, always trying to be the most prepared. And how much do you think Roy Halladay's dad contributed to his son's success throughout his major league career?
Well, yeah, I don't think Roy probably doesn't make the big leagues if it wasn't for his dad pushing him and working with him when he was a kid. There's no doubt about that. I think Roy's dad was a tremendous influence on Roy. Not only, like I said, he got him into baseball. He taught him, pitching mechanics. He built a mound in his basement. He built a batting cage in his basement, and he made his son work at it. Did he push him too much at times? I think the answer to that is probably yes. Roy said as much to people at times. But on the other hand, if he wasn't pushed that way, maybe he just becomes a very good high school player or pretty solid college player and then kind of flames out. But I think that constant pushing and the drive to be the best, that never really left Roy, even though it might have caused him some problems at times. If he hadn't had that in a weird way, maybe he doesn't enjoy the success that he had.
One of the hallmarks of Halladay's career was how he constantly tried to add to his training regimen and constantly tried to improve each season and try to build upon it. He was never satisfied with how he was last year. He was always trying to get better and really try to push Toronto at first to postseason success, something that he hadn't experienced before. And do you think his dad's teaching of tinkering and research and trying to be the best, I know this kind of is similar to the last question, but do you think like that specifically was one of the reasons why that Halladay always tried to add to his regimen, always tried to find a better way to get the most out of his body?
I think that's probably more Harvey than anything else, to be honest with you. I think his dad taught him the importance of work ethic, and just Roy kind of got an idea of because of his dad, of how much work he needed to put in to be good. But I think it was more Harvey than anything else, because Harvey talked a lot about preparation and doing everything that you can do to be ready for the time that you pitched. And so in Roy's mind, he needed to not only be mentally ready to pitch, which meant being focused, of course, but also studying hitters. But I think the physical aspect of it in Roy's mind was important. So in Roy's mind, he had to check all these boxes every week in between starts. And then during the off season, I have to run a certain amount, I have to lift a certain amount, I have to throw a certain amount, and I have to do a certain amount on this day and this day and this day and this day. And if I don't, I won't feel like I did everything that I possibly could to be successful on the mound. So if he skipped the day, he's like, I don't really feel like running today. Then when he stepped in the mound, he might have a little bit of doubt in his head of, boy, I really probably shouldn't have skipped running on Tuesday, because now I don't necessarily feel so confident. So I think that probably had more to do with it than anything. And then also just the continual adding. I think that was just his way of making sure that he didn't slide back into mediocrity. I think he was just scared of being considered a failure again. And I don't know if that was his dad so much as just as maybe his inner fears and maybe insecurities at times in a sense. But also, I think it was more just of, this is what I think I need to do to be successful. I don't want to plateau. I want to get, every year I can be a little bit better. So if that means I can run a little bit more or lift a little bit more or throw a little bit more or even throw a little bit less and, whatever, do a little bit more stretching exercises, etc. That's what he was going to do.
There certainly seems like there could have been a mixture of his own insecurities and how he wanted to be the best, but overall, he held himself more accountable than seemingly any other player. And I think one of the greatest examples in your book is how the players took this trip. I think it was to Hawaii, and it was all these all-stars, and all of them were relaxing, including Jimmy Rollins, and Halladay himself was just continuing to work out, continuing to try to find the edge. And I think that's just so inspiring to maybe all of these other baseball players that he eventually helped coach and try to help out, but also just to any reader reading it, because it kind of just forces like each person to kind of hold themselves accountable and not to make any excuses.
Yeah, he was always, he didn't really turn off. The trip you're talking about is this Nike trip that Nike puts on for all of its clients, and every offseason they get all these baseball players together that are Nike players, and they go somewhere exotic, Hawaii or, wherever, the Bahamas, etc. And they can hang out and most players just kind of use it to relax, but Roy had to get up and throw and work out because in his mind, he had a start date. It might be November 15th, it might be November 31st or November 30th. And he had to start then. So if the Nike trip happened to fall after the start date, he wasn't just going to stop because that's a week of wasted time otherwise. And so I think that was just, again, that was just kind of showed a little bit of who he was. And I think that's what really impressed him. What impressed a lot of his teammates over the years was, this guy really is the real deal. He's not just like a guy that people say works hard. Like, he really does work hard.
Would you consider Halladay a little bit of a loner? He always seemed to do things that put him over the edge more unlike any other player. And because of that, did it seem really important that he had a friend like Chris Carpenter early in his career, had a similar upbringing, and were both highly touted prospects, but found early struggles as well?
Yeah, I think you could say Roy was a little bit of a loner. I think, he definitely wasn't somebody that enjoyed going to parties and going to events and things like that. He just wasn't that type of guy. So I think, Chris Carpenter, who the Blue Jays drafted out of high school a couple years before him, I think they immediately connected, and they had kind of a shared experience there where they were both first-round draft picks. They were both first-round draft picks out of high school, and they both had these enormous expectations placed on them. And so, whereas Roy couldn't necessarily relate to somebody who was drafted in the 30th round or whatever, like he could relate to Chris Carpenter because Chris Carpenter is going through the same thing. So they struck up this friendship, and they became obviously really, just the best of friends to the point where they would go on vacations together and hang out together and stayed in touch throughout the rest of Roy's life.
And it was really cool to see that still happen, even when Halladay moved on to the Phillies eventually, and Carpenter was moved on to the Cardinals, and how they still went on these elaborate trips. So, and I remember especially that elaborate fishing trip that made headlines that you mentioned, and it seems like it was a really good and beneficial relationship for Halladay.
Yeah, I think they wouldn't talk about baseball together. They enjoyed spending time with each other because, yeah, well, they might talk about baseball. They also didn't, they had other stuff that they could really truly get away from the game. Whereas if you're going on vacation, if you're Roy Halladay and you're going on vacation with somebody who's just has a more normal job, they might ask you, "Oh, what's this guy like? What was that moment like? Let's talk about baseball. Let's talk about baseball." As with Chris Carpenter, you don't have to talk about baseball because they're not that impressed, in the sense they're not that impressed with it, and they go on vacations to get away. So I think that was, that was a big part of their relationship as well.
It seemed like Carpenter kind of brought out this different side to Halladay that fans maybe were not used to seeing, and at least in the beginnings of the book, that maybe a lot of readers weren't used to seeing, how Halladay off the field was kind of this lovable goofball, but on the field he was this insane competitor. And the same also could be said about his injury history. He was still completely dominant by 2011. In 2012, he had a down season, but there was reason to believe that maybe he could come back. But he was hiding all this physical and emotional pain off the field. And how difficult was it for Halladay to present himself as this mentally strong, dependable player on the field when he just struggled with depression, social anxiety, and immense physical pain off the field?
Yeah, it was very tough for him, because he just felt tremendous responsibility to be Roy Halladay and to live up to his contract. And so when he started to suffer pain and back pain, this debilitating back pain, and then when he started to struggle on the field, he just felt really, I guess, remorseful, regretful, terrible about the way he was performing. And I think he took it personally. So then he started to try to find any way that he could to be more successful on the field, and that's why I think he tried to stretch out his career as long as he did, because he, for a while there, he just could not believe that he could not get back to where he was, or I should say maybe he just could not try to get back to where everybody thought he should be.
He gave everything he had on the field. He was taking, I remember you mentioned in your book that he was taking painkillers just to try to stay on the field. But when he got home to his wife, Brandy, and his kids, he was a shell of his former self. He could barely move. He was very lethargic. He was starting to be very depressed. But he was starting to turn it around towards the end of his life. He was going to rehab. He got back into his hobbies, became a mental skills coach of the Phillies. If he were still alive today, what impact would he have on Major League Baseball continuing after his playing career?
Oh, I think he would have been incredibly impactful as a mental skills coach. Just having him as a resource. You have mental skills coaches today that are kind of like touchy-feely, and I think Roy would have demanded accountability from players, kind of like Harvey did. He probably wouldn't have been as gruff as Harvey. I don't know if he had it in his nature, but I think he would have been tremendous. I mean, to have a Hall of Fame pitcher as your mental skills coach, I think you couldn't help but help a pitcher out or a player out. And the players that I talked to that worked with him said that he had an impact on them in various ways. And so and then I think ultimately, maybe once his kids got into college or even out of college, I think I would not have been surprised to see Roy Halladay working as a pitching coach one day. I think he would have, because then he could have worked on the physical aspect of the game and the mental aspect of the game at the same time. And I think it's something that he really, really would have enjoyed.
He always had this great nature about him, despite being one of the best players on the field growing up, despite being one of the best players during his Major League Baseball career. He always gave back to the community. He always gave back to the people that helped him out on the way. He always tried to pay it forward. And he was really, if you had to draw up the perfect teammate, that was Roy Halladay. He was reliable on the mound and reliable as teammates. And he was just kind of the perfect person that everyone wanted on his team.
Yeah, he really was. I think sometimes he might have intimidated some of the younger players, but I think if you get the courage to actually ask Roy Halladay a question or ask for advice or help, From what I understand and from what I saw, he was very accommodating. He would always, help somebody out, give somebody advice, allow somebody to work out with him. And I think that, anytime he had success, it was always the team that had the success. Anytime the team lost, he always pinned it. He always took responsibility for that loss. And I think as a teammate, they really appreciated that, and they loved that about him. They saw how hard he worked in between starts, so they knew how much he cared about his performance. So, you had teammates saying, hey, when we lost and he pitched well, we always felt terribly about it because we knew how much work he put into it. And even if he went out there and he pitched terribly, which didn't happen that often, they felt terribly about it because they saw how much work they put into it. And I think, if you had every teammate, every player on a team put in as much effort as Roy Halladay, obviously talent is very important, but if all things being equal, you'd rather have a team full of Roy Halladay work out with his work ethic than not.
And his experiences are so relatable as well because so many major league players, so many minor league players, they struggle so much when they make it to the professional level, as did Roy Halladay. And as you mentioned as well, he was so accommodating. He would sit at tables just to wait for someone to approach him. I remember you mentioning that in the book. And it's pretty remarkable, too, because usually when players make it that high and they get paid so many millions of dollars, they may let the fame get a little bit to their head. They might do some crazy things, but Halladay always seemed down to earth. He always didn't really seem to let that get to him. And he always just continued, as I mentioned earlier, just to pay it forward and be a good teammate and a good person.
Yeah, I think that was important to him. He never really got the whole. I think it was probably coming from some social anxiety or whatever. He just didn't feel comfortable being out in public. So in his mind, he would rather just be left alone and kind of do his own thing, which is why I think he enjoyed flying, which is why I think he enjoyed fishing, and why he enjoyed coaching his kids, because it was just kind of a smaller thing. Maybe solitary like flying or fishing. And then coaching his kids, it was just kind of like he was just being a dad, So, but in terms of his teammates, yeah, same thing. I think he just, he didn't really, you never really heard any stories of Roy Halladay big leaguing somebody. Just generally, I think a good person that wanted to do right and wanted to give back whenever he could, whether it be in the community or with the organization or with his teammates.
And on that note, it must have been so difficult for him deciding to leave Toronto, the organization that drafted him, and going to the Phillies. And that was actually my favorite chapter, the one that was titled Time to Move On, because you never really get to see an in-depth look of a player changing teams. And so many fans are angry when that happens because they want their amazing hometown player to stay with their team forever and retire on their team. But Halladay was fed up with Toronto. They had not made the postseason throughout his career, and he was not ready for another rebuild. And just given that Halladay had so much social anxiety, how difficult was it for him to try to request a trade teams and eventually move on to Philadelphia?
Well, I think at that point, I don't think it. I think the only difficult part is maybe he didn't want to make the Blue Jays look like the bad guys, and that's why I think he told Alex Anthopoulos, "Listen, if you need to pin this on me, and I don't want you guys to take a hit because you're trading me." So in terms of the personality of himself asking for a trade, I think at that point he was comfortable enough with himself and what was going on that he was actually quite comfortable, I think, demanding a trade at that point. I don't think he liked being part of trade talks, etc. But I think he, the idea of, well, I have one option here, or two options. I could be quiet and possibly waste another year in Toronto, or I can speak up, maybe get traded to another team and win a World Series somewhere. And I think at that point he was comfortable enough to ask for the trade.
And given your personal background as a beat writer and a baseball insider, you've probably seen so many players leave their hometown team and move on to another team, and fans get outraged. They blame the player. They maybe blame the team a little bit, but they're annoyed the players leaving them for a higher contract or just not wanting to stay or not wanting them to stay in quotations. But Why do you think baseball players or just athletes in general get so much slack for wanting to change teams and have the chance at making the postseason?
I think it's because, from a fan's point of view, when you're wearing your uniform, so like if you're a Blue Jays fan and you're the players wearing the Blue Jays uniform, they just consider you one of theirs. Whereas the player has, he has himself to look out for in a lot of ways. And it's like I always tell people, when you see a player leave a team and he signs a $120 million contract, and then you hear that the hometown team offered only $80 million, and somebody goes, well, come on, what's the difference between $80 million and $120 million? And I always say $40 million is the difference between $80 million and $120 million. And I know when you're making that much money, if you only make $80 million, you're set, and future generations are set, no doubt. But why should you leave that money on the table? It's still $40 million. And so I think it's just hard for people to relate. Again, like, the teams I rooted for growing up, when I would hear a player leave for more money, I'd be like, oh my God, that guy's so selfish. But now that I'm actually covering teams and covering players, I totally get why they do it. There's no ill will. If a hometown team lowballs a player, why should he stay? Very rarely does anybody ever take less money. It'd be like if your job, my job, brother's job, or whatever, if you could make twice as much in the same industry and all you had to do was move to a different town, I think most people would probably consider moving to make twice or three times or four times as much, especially if you're making $40 million more.
And I think in recent years of how free agency has really played out and how teams are almost really trying to lowball them, not sign them until February, not trying to hand out these mega contracts. I'm a Yankees fan personally, and I know that the Yankees are trying to lowball LeMahieu, and LeMahieu requested $100 million, and some reports even said $125 million. But it's nice to know that there isn't maybe as much ill will as maybe fans were thinking, because at the end of the day, like, this is a player, or all these big players kind of helped out their team. They're thankful to the team, but they may want to move on and get the higher contract.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the end, you kind of, again, the career is so short that I think you just kind of have to go for what you think you can get at the time. And if a team like the Yankees or whatever your team is that you came from, if they're competitive, yeah, then they might stick around a little bit. But you also want to feel wanted too, So like if Team B offers you just a ton of cash and your hometown team doesn't really step up, I mean, it's kind of tough to swallow your pride, even if that pride is a $40 million deal or a $50 million deal. You want to feel wanted as well. So there's so many different factors that come when it comes down to these contracts. And again, the one thing I have kind of changed my perspective on in covering baseball over the years is that I totally get why players do what they do. And, like, a lot of people don't like Scott Boras, the agent. I tell people that, listen, if my kid was talented enough to be a first round draft pick and Scott Boras came to our house and said, I'd like to represent you, I wouldn't tell my son no, because I think Scott he's obviously super talented at his job, and he makes his clients a lot of money, and the career span is short for these players. So, you want to have your best, you want to have the best representing you if you can.
I think another intimate detail that you provide in your book was that Halladay really wanted to live up to his contract with the Phillies, and he was unable to do so because all these injuries caught up to him. And again, as a baseball insider and being someone who's been around baseball players for over the past decade, do players kind of feel similar to Halladay, how they want to live up to the contract, and when they're not doing so, they'll try to do whatever means necessary to, I guess, make sure that they're living up to the contract and providing for the team?
Yeah, I think so, to varying degrees. I think Roy took it a step too far. Certainly to try to stay on the field, but I think all these players feel pressure to live up to their contracts. I mean, you see it all the time. Like, a few years ago, like, Carl Crawford and Adrian Gonzalez when they go to the Red Sox from other markets, and then they find themselves under this intense pressure to live up to the deals, and things don't work out. And I think you see that type of thing all the time. I know for the Phillies' point of view, this is David Robertson, former Yankees closer. He signed a 2-year, I think, $24 million deal, and he blew out his elbow the month in, and you could just see how much it really bothered him that he basically did not contribute the past 2 years while he made all that money. It's not, again, you don't give that money back. You sign a contract for a reason. But these players do care. They want to be good. They don't want to be bad. They don't want to be injured and fail immediately. They don't like knowing that people don't like them, even if they say they don't care. They do. They read it. They hear about it. So I do think there's a lot of that going on, the human aspect of it, in terms of being respected, being liked, etc.
At the end of the day, they are still human. They want to provide for their fan bases. They want to provide for the team that signed them to this lucrative deal. And you also mentioned how Halladay took this a step further, and that's when he was taking painkillers and got addicted to them. And he was still trying to find a way to be a workhorse, be a Roy Halladay of the past. And in hindsight, should and could have Halladay slowed down the intensity of his training regimen and still been as great, or did he have to do that because that's the type of person he was?
Yeah, I almost feel like, he probably could have been as good without the running and the lifting that he did throughout the years. But on the other hand, in the moment, I don't think you could have told Roy Halladay, like, listen, you don't need to do all this stuff. I feel like he felt that he needed to do it to be successful, and so he did it. And now the only thing, I think looking back, he probably he should have walked away earlier. But again, in the moment, it's the beginning of the 2013 season, and you were so good in 2011, probably should have won the Cy Young Award that year. And you go, I'm only a year away, really, from being the dominant Roy Halladay. I know I can get back to that level, so let me try this, let me try that. And that's what he did. And obviously, we know what happened after that.
And do you think his wife, Brandy, was one of the people who kind of pushed him into retiring early because she kind of saw every day what Roy Halladay wasn't on the baseball field and just wanted him to, I guess, return to as a normal husband, a normal father, and a healthy one for that matter, too?
Yeah, I think, for sure she wanted him to get out of the game. And, I think once his contract ended, he no longer felt a responsibility to earn the money. In other words, I think if he had signed a 3-year extension with the Phillies, a 3-year contract with the Phillies, he probably would have retired after the 2013 season. But it was a 4-year deal, so or 10, 11, 12, after the 2013, after the 2012 season, he would have retired. But he went one more year. So that's just kind of the way I think he looked at it. So I think the fact that the contract ended made it easy for him to kind of walk away. He wasn't going to go and try to find another contract. There was no point. He had all the money. He had all the money in the world at that point, so he didn't really need to do it. He didn't really need to do anything else.
I do find it very interesting how he's always been this great competitor in the field, and he always tried to give his all and wanted to stay in Major League Baseball as long as he could. But at that point in his career, he knew that it was over. He was going to play out the contract and then go home and be with his wife and family. And I just want to touch upon his family for a quick moment, because his family went through so much dealing with his depression and social anxiety, and seeing Roy Halladay coming home as a shell of his former self, and then to see him turn around and only for his untimely death to happen. It's truly a tragic story. And you really talked to Brandy, and you talked to those around him that was part of his family as well. And are you still in touch with them today? Are they doing any better handling with his untimely demise?
I haven't really talked with Brandy. When was the last time I talked with her? I talked with her last spring training, actually, in Florida, back in Clearwater, Florida. I haven't talked to her since then. But I think they were slowly It's obviously difficult, and I can't even imagine. But I think Brandy's trying her best to, make sure she's okay, and but most importantly, make sure that her kids are okay. Their oldest son Braden's at Penn State playing baseball,
Hmm.
and the youngest Braden's in high school still. But they are. The last time I talked to her, obviously they were still kind of they're doing better, but everybody misses their dad and their husband for sure.
And it's even worse when your dad is a MLB Hall of Famer and one of the best players of his generation too. And I think the most heart-wrenching moments of the story was how when the news came out, Brandon couldn't even tell her kids that Halladay had passed away. They found out beforehand, and it was just a truly heartbreaking moment. And what was it like to cover something so intense like that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, certainly just tragic and sad, and I have two little kids, and your heart breaks for the boys, just because it's crazy, and there's no closure there. Like one minute he's dropping them off at school, and next minute he's gone forever, and you're never going to see him again, and it's just that inability to kind of say goodbye and to like know it was coming, and it's just really tough. And like you said, like I wrote in the book, friends, because of social media, told the boys first before Brandy could tell them, and that's also very sad and kind of a I don't know, commentary on our society nowadays. Everything is out there, and everything is social media, and because of the way social media works, there's not a lot of empathy or sympathy or sense of timing or anything like that, and it's just sad that they had to go through it like that.
And what was your personal reaction to see Halladay pass away so tragically? Because you've been covering the Phillies for a very long period of time. I'm sure you've had so many conversations with Halladay. Tell me about the day when you heard that Halladay had passed.
Well, I remember it was on election day, probably like in Philadelphia anyway, and I was actually at the my polling station, I guess, or whatever you call it, and getting word of it, and it was just it was brutal. It was brutal, and it's just shocking because, and I hate to say this, but if a Phillies legend in his 80s passes away, you know, not that you don't hurt or feel bad, but it's less jarring. But when it's like the Roy Halladay dies in a plane crash, it's just totally jarring, which it was, and you don't, it's just it's kind of like anytime Kobe Bryant, when he died in a helicopter crash, it's just like, oh my God, like that is not supposed to happen, and then same thing with Roy.
He was a young man. He was taken way too soon, and that was truly, truly horrific. And this might be a bit of a strange question, but how long after his death did you realize I have to write about a book about him and I want to tell his story?
Uh, it was probably a couple of years, I think. Yeah, I mean, I basically wrote and reported on the book throughout 2019, so it had been over a year, and honestly, um, I it was something that had been in my mind, and the reason why even before he passed away, I thought it would be a good book because I was really fascinated by Roy kind of taking on the second career as a mental skills coach and his willingness or want to help athletes and kind of carry on the work of Harvey Dorfman. I thought that would be a fascinating book, and then that was always in my mind. And then in talking to my publisher, uh, obviously after Roy passed away, decided maybe we could still do something along those lines, and that was kind of one of the goals from the book is to kind of pass along Roy's wisdom that he learned from Harvey, and in some ways make the book almost kind of like a complementary piece to the mental ABCs of pitching, and also kind of maybe help people, inspire people that are battling addiction or depression or anything like that. And it's been kind of amazing and humbling that I've actually heard from people that have battled addiction, depression, I've heard from, current and former major league, minor league coaches and pitchers about the book for the Harvey Dorfman aspect of it. And I've heard from parents that said, I used to really push my kid, but after reading this book, I realized that's not the way to go. So I've really taught my kid to have fun more than anything. And, so I've really heard from like a whole different variety of people because of the book.
Well, it certainly sounds like your book has changed some lives and has taken a piece of their own lives away from Halladay's life and how he was such a influential person. And did you believe, or when you first wrote the book, did you think that it would become a New York Times bestseller and be so popular among baseball fanatics? Would you think that it would have this type of success?
No, I mean, I just kind of wanted to write a book, and obviously you hope that some people will buy it and enjoy it, and so that's really all I kind of was hoping for. I didn't really have any expectations other than I just hope when people buy it, they connect with it in some way and they enjoy it in some way, and obviously with that, maybe will come some sales or whatever, so that's been really nice to see. The response that I've gotten has been mostly positive.
And was there any competition to write Halladay's biography when he passed away? And if so, since you're a Phillies beat writer, did you have an edge over some of your peers to publish the book first?
I don't know if there's. I don't really think there was any competition to write the book. I feel like I was the first one to give it a go, and because of my Phillies connections, I was able to get introduced to Brandy Halladay and kind of pitch my idea for the book. And then she thankfully agreed to help, because without her, I don't think the book would have been anywhere near as good, quite frankly. And so I don't know, maybe if a Toronto writer had wanted to write it, I don't know if they would have. I'm sure I'm sure they could have written a quality book, but I think for sure. But I think for me, just having that Phillies connection and Brandy's kind of association still with the Phillies kind of helped me again. Like at least I got an introduction to her, and I thought she really made the book. Without Brandy, the book is okay. It's a nice biography, but I think Brandy really completed it and made it something special, I think.
I really can't say I'm too surprised that Brandy was so helpful with you in this experience, not only because that you mentioned her quite a lot in the book, but she was always such a huge part of Halladay's career, from giving Halladay the mental ABCs of pitching to, making sure that her kids were protected from the media, social media after his death, and also standing up and giving his Hall of Fame speech. What kind of person is Brandy when you met her? And she must be really an incredible human being.
Yeah, she is. She's very open. She's very honest, and and I appreciate that about her. But she's also a mother, and so she's very protective as well, which I totally understand. And so I kind of had to, again, I had to kind of pitch to her what I thought the book was going to be, and what I made it very clear I was not interested in writing a salacious tell-all about Roy Halladay. I did legitimately want to write about the kind of the mental side of the game, and on the field and off the field, and tell the story about how far he fell early in his career and how far he climbed out of the hole that he was in, and then obviously, but I said also, listen, I have to talk about what happened at the end. I have to write about that, and but I'm going to do it, and again, not in a Roy Halladay is a bad human being. I think I explained pretty well what was going on behind the scenes and why he suffered the way he did. And I told her I would be very respectful in that way, while also being honest and truthful about it.
And that's really all you can ask for when telling a story as personal and as tragic and as influential as Roy Halladay is. And you also have written several books in the past before this one. You wrote The Rotation, a season with the Phillies and the greatest pitching staff ever assembled, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Philadelphia Phillies, heart-pounding, jaw-dropping, and gut-wrenching moments from Philadelphia Phillies history. Did your other publications prepare you to write about the life of Roy Halladay, or was this just an entirely different ball game per se?
Well, I think it helped me understand like kind of like the workload involved, and I knew that this book was going to be a lot more work, just because the first book I wrote was more just kind of like a collection of stories, Philly stories, and so while it was labor intensive, it was more manageable. The story, the story about the 2011 rotation, which included Halladay, was a ton of work, but also you had all those people at your disposal covering the team year round. So, whereas of course, obviously with Roy, Roy was gone, Harvey Dorfman was gone, Mel Queen was gone. So you had to do a lot more research, and I had to talk to a lot more people. I talked to over 100 different people for the book to try to paint the clearest picture. And then, honestly, if I had 5 more years to work on the book, I could have talked to 5,000 people, try to paint the picture of Roy Halladay. But I tried to do what I could in the time that I had.
Well, it was certainly a truly remarkable book, a truly encapsulating book, and it was such a pleasure to read, Todd. And once again, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It really means a lot. And to anyone watching, please do yourself a favor and buy a copy of Todd's book, Doc: The Life of Roy Halladay. And also, please continue to subscribe to BSP, and also please continue to watch At Seville. So until next time, this is the At Seville podcast, and hope you all have a great day.